I am going to assume that we are live and we are here. Hope that you had a little great intermission. Super excited to ground ourselves in this work. I hope that you are feeling super inspired by Monica's keynote. Listen, you guys, Latinas, we don't die, we multiply, and we are here for all of that. Okay. I am super excited to be kicking off our next panel discussion with an amazing list of women who are going to bring it to us. Okay. This discussion is going to be about culture, familismo, effects of in with Latinas in public service, the good, the bad, and yes, the ugly, mijo, because you know sometimes it gets a little fail out here. I am so incredibly excited because we are joined today by one of my she-heroes. She may not know this or may not even remember, but I met Lucy Flores in Boston with an organization called Chica Project, and she was one of the keynote speakers. And I was like, yes, girl, bring it all day, every day. Brought her entire authentic self into the space. And I just have to say, Lucy, just being in your presence and knowing what you have gone through and seeing you run as you are was so super inspiring to me. So much so that I also decided to run for office. So I just wanted to let you know you did that. But anyways, let me tell you a little bit about her. She is the co-founder of Luz Media. In 2010, Flores, along with three Latina colleagues, became the first Latinas elected to the Nevada legislature in the history of the state, okay? One of the first. Yes, Lucy is also a former candidate for Congress, a lawyer, and a media entrepreneur, okay? Y'all are in for a treat, okay? We also have Johanny Adams, who is a communications director for the Latino Victory Project. She is a bilingual communication strategist and political commentator focused on intersections of culture, politics, and social justice. Yes, Latino Victory Project. You guys are so incredibly lucky to have her. And we also have with us Dr. Christina Bejarano, who is a professor of political science at Jane Nelson Institute for Women's Leadership Faculty Scholar at Texas Women's University. She is an author, a speaker, and an advisor on Latino electoral politics in the United States. So in other words, people, we are here for all of this, and we're going to dive in asking our panelists to a few questions. Okay, I'm going to go right into it. We also have one more speaker. Hopefully she'll be joining us soon, and when she does, I will make sure that we introduce her. So let's just kick things off, ladies. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of the key aspects of the Latino culture and family values, and how these values help or have hindered your political journey. And I'm going to start with my good friend, Lucy.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Obviously super excited to be here. I hope everyone is having an amazing, pretty much morning based on the time zone. So everyone's still morning. It's going to be an amazing day. I am, one of the things that before I start to answer the question is, we're just so lucky to have these kinds of resources, because I think we can all reflect on the times before when we were running or we were kind of getting started in politics or whatever our careers looked like, and we just didn't have these kinds of things. And what a difference it would have made just in terms of anxiety and knowing that there were others out there. And it's just such a beautiful community. So it's so incredible to see. And stay tuned for the entire day if you can, because there's just so much wisdom out there, including on this panel. And and that's the thing about culture, right? Heading right into the topic. We are such an amazing, incredible, supportive community, and yet stereotypes and, the crabs in the bucket mentality and all of these different things that people think that they know about us or that they think is accurate about our community. Once you actually start to put yourself out there, you realize that sure, there might be some aspects of that continues to be true, but you also recognize that it is our generation and beyond that is totally dismantling those stereotypes, that framework, that scarcity mentality that we were conditioned, to believe, that we had to fight amongst ourselves in order to actually make it, et cetera, not realizing that when we dismantle the structure, there's enough for everyone. And really seeing and kind of, going through my career in this space, meeting amazing Latinas like Julia and Dr. Bejarano, I mean, and just so many across the country, you start to then recognize, yeah, our culture is amazing. And our culture is one of unity. And our culture is one of support. And really, it's just a matter of really approaching this community with that framework in mind. Because when you do, that's who you're going to attract back. And frankly, that's what you're then going to do. And then that just kind of snowballs. So I'll just leave that as a general commentary on it. I'd love to hear from Dr. Bejarano because she's like the expert. She's got the data. She's probably got a bunch of statistics. But it really is, the thing is that this community is ours and it's up to us to define that community for ourselves. And it's up to us to decide how we're going to move collectively this community forward. And that's so powerful.
Thank you for that. And Doctor, she already lined it up. The expert is in the house, so bring it.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here with you all. And thank you for the intro and the segue. And in terms of the culture and the family values, I think there's a lot that we can talk about in terms of good and bad. But I think I took this in like the personal direction when I was thinking about this question. So I was thinking about my academic journey, and I was a first generation college student, which I'm sure many of us can relate to, and also the first in my family to get a graduate degree. So it was very hard to think about leaving my family in North Texas and going to Iowa. First off, it was a question of where is Iowa? Where are you going? And you're going by yourself. So that was a big change for me. And I think that's also something that a lot of Latinas can relate to, the thought of leaving their family, going somewhere brand new. But I was motivated in my grad school journey to try to understand how I can help the Latino community. And I do that in a way by sharing my research and having a purpose with the research to be able to share it with groups like Latinas Represent, which I've been doing since the initiative started in about 2014, 2015. And in graduate school, I was interested in the growing political success of women of color, especially Latinas, in political office. But at the time, a lot of research didn't have a lot of explanations to explain what was going on because a lot of the political science research tended to focus on white voters and candidates. And so the common conception or the expectation was that women of color and Latinas would face double disadvantages if they were to run for office. And that's the idea that their disadvantage that comes from their gender identity and from their ethnic or racial identity was going to bring disadvantages upon disadvantages. And that's also a conception or a misconception that a lot of Latinas might be having right now. But if they had growing success to get elected, I wanted to know what was helping them, what was hurting them. And so I wanted to push back on that common misconception. And so my research disagreed with that misconception. And I argued that the intersecting identities that we all have can provide us with advantages when we are getting involved in politics or even thinking about running for office. And so that's definitely what I share the research with other Latina groups like Latinas Represent, because I want to share with you as well that we need to expand our conceptions of what's going to be a good candidate for office and expand our conceptions of what we can bring to the table with politics. And with our keynote speaker, with Monica, who just spoke, she was talking about everything that we bring to the table. And I want to be able to share that with you. And hopefully we're going to share that with this panel, where we can think about the good. We know that there's some bad in terms of the obstacles we may have, but I definitely want to talk about the good and the advantages that we can bring. And I will stop there until we get to our next question. Thanks.
Johanny, bring it.
How do I follow that? But I'm very excited to be here and be in community with all of you and Julia and Lucy. We both have been Latino Victoria candidates in the past, so I'm very excited to see you both here, and Dr. Bejarano as well. We've been together on other panels as well. So exactly that. I think our community, it's a community of unity. I think we come together. We've seen that happening in the past when we have come together as a community to support, around issues, around, unfortunately when, negative things happen, or, have seen Texas, we come together. And I know that we have that capacity to, have those conversations and continue to have the conversations, especially the hard conversations, around topics like, abortion and, gun safety and keeping our community safe. So I do know that we have that in us, and that we as a community can come together and have a conversation. But at the same time, just like Lucy and Dr. Bejarano said, they are bad pieces. And one of them is electability, right? Like, what is that electability trap for Latinas? The barriers that they face even before they raise their hands to say, I want to run for office, right? The norms, the cultural norms that we have to break, right? That we have to pass through for us to see ourselves in positions of power, to say, you know what, I can run. And it is really hard to run for office, right? For anyone across the country. It's very hard to say, I'm going to put my name on the ballot. I'm going to fundraise. I think that's the biggest hurdle that many of us face when we're, seeking public office, is the ability to fundraise, the ability, like, how do we fundraise for a campaign, right? Like, that's not part of our culture. We don't have people in our network who have that kind of wealth, who can, say, I'm going to donate $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is, amount of money for you to run for office. So starting from the get-go, like, we're already at disadvantage because of like the people that, that are in our lives, the people that we have to kind of like educate around what it needs to run for office in this country. So I think it's really important for us to talk about that piece, to talk about the piece of like what Latinas have to face even before they put their name on the ballot, even before they say, I want to run for office. I can see myself leading my community. And then at the same time, it's really interesting because when you talk to Latina candidates, they know about their community more, even the people who already are in office, they're electeds. You talk to them when I need to talk to someone in California, in New York, and Florida, Texas, like, I call a Latina community leader and they know everything. They know like the Pepe Peñas of their community. They know where to go. They know who to talk to. And then when you tell them, would you be willing to run for office at some point? They actually don't see themselves as elected officials. They don't see themselves like, I can be that, because it's not part of who we are. It's not part of our culture. And I think normalizing running for office, it's key, especially for my organization, for Latino Victory Project. We've been doing this work supporting Latino candidates across the country, but we, in 2018, 2020, we decided to actually create a program that focuses on elected Latinas. It's called First Latinas. You can go to firstlatinas.org, and that program does that. That program is helping recruit, support, right? Bring the resources they need to run, compete, and win, right? Like, that's the whole point. Make ourselves ready to run, and also being able to see ourselves as viable. And that's a lot what we hear from Latina candidates. Okay, I put my name on the ballot. I'm doing the right thing. I'm talking to the community. I'm fundraising. But then some institutions, in the democratic ecosystem, they don't see them as viable. They think, you're a Latina, and maybe you're not running in a Latina district. That's another misconception. That's another trap that a lot of our candidates fall into, is because it's your district, it's the city, or whatever seat you're running for, a Latino seat or not. And I think there's so much wrong with that. We can run and represent any community. We happen to love our community so much that we want to represent our community because we understand the struggles and what they're going through, and we feel like we can be a voice to that particular community. But that doesn't mean that we cannot run or compete in other seats. So I think it's a matter of like having those conversations in our community, starting having those conversations with Latinas themselves, and telling them and assuring them that you can do this, right? Like you can do this. Validate their campaigns, right? Help them bring the resources that they need, staff that they need. Understanding the ecosystem is so complicated. It's grueling work, right? It's not easy. I would never say running for office is really easy. And Julia and Lucy, you can jump in here because we both have done the work, and it's really hard work and expensive. So I do think that starting from understanding the basics of like running for office, what is that? Like once you are ready, once your name is on the ballot, what's next for you? What is going to help you to get to the finish line? And I think we need more Latino victory projects in the ecosystem. We need more groups to understand that Latinas can run, that Latinas can lead, and actually put the money where their mouth is, right? Because a lot of the times we see people talking about and institutions talking about Latinas as it relates to the Latina vote, right? That's important. Those are the Latinas we need to mobilize. Those are the Latinas we need to, get out the vote. But when it comes to Latina candidates, that's a separate, different conversation. And I think we really need to, dismantle that. Latinas can be more than voters. Latinas are leaders. We see that across the country. We see that in communities, from community centers to boardrooms. We need more Latinas at the table. There's no way that we have less than 2% of representation in the United States Congress. We're 31 million strong. And we need more. We need to make sure that we have Latinas at every seat and at every table across the country.
And that's why we're here today. We are here today to take back our power, right? Reclaim it and understand that no matter where we are, we have a right to be there. And more importantly, we have to show up in our true, authentic selves to dismantle the system. No, I'm just joking. But yes, we have a lot of disruption that we need to cause here, because, I often talk about being the first Afro-Latina elected here in the city of Boston, but, I'm also an immigrant. I came to this country when I was 5 years old. I was also the first person in my family to graduate high school, let alone college, right? And so when we think about these first, when we also think about the barriers that we have to face as we're deciding to even put our name on the ballot, there are a lot of isms that come along with how we should be. I'm also a single mom. So the narrative, and when we start thinking about culture and values, those things really play a role in who we are and what the expectation is of what a Latina is in terms of how she should show up in this world and who we are here to represent, right? So Lucy, I know that you and your journey as an elected and really navigating when you were running for Congress, right? You shattered that glass ceiling in terms of what it really is to be Latina and to be your full self. So can you talk to us a little bit about what that journey was like for you?
Yeah, as you were talking, you were saying all of that, all of this was coming to mind. And Johanny, when she was talking about all the challenges and viability and can she even run and will we get all of the same support? The answer is no. The bottom line is that the answer is no, right? Like Latino Victory Fund, they don't get the same kind of funding that these other groups get. They don't get what Emily's List gets. They don't, it just is what it is. But that being said, I think what's so incredibly powerful about us challenging that is that the work is being done, and some of us are going to win and some of us are not. That's just the reality. But we actually are winning across the board every single time a Latina runs in her true, authentic self. Because when I was elected, and this was it feels like ages ago, but it was in 2010, and there were no other Latina electeds ever to the state legislature, right? So it's not like we had any examples. And I remember the moment when I said to myself, I'm not going to pretend I don't need to pretend. And that moment was actually when I was externing in the legislature. And I was working on wrongful conviction reform. I was still in law school, and I wasn't, I wasn't thinking about running for office. I was fully committed to, wrongful conviction reform in the state of Nevada. Ended up at the legislature lobbying. Ended up passing a package of reform. Essentially, I was the only person on the ground in the legislature as a student extern. So I thought to myself, one, holy cow, I did that. And second, the day that I walked into the legislature, it lasted for about a week or so, didn't last very long. I was not myself. I didn't know, it was a foreign land. The only Latinos in the building were the one that were cleaning, which tends to often be the case, right? We've all been in those situations. And you're just surrounded by, generally in politics, older white people, lots of men, lots of pictures of old men all over the walls, nobody that looks like you, right? And I'm young, I'm 28 at the time, and I am scared out of my wits. And anyone who knows me is like, impossible. And I'm like, oh no, trust me. I was like, what am I doing here? Severe imposter syndrome, all this stuff, right? And I said to myself, I got to fit in. So my hair, I remember it was like super pulled back, all tight, like no makeup, no earrings, just, conservative as can be. Did not speak a lick of English, Spanish, right? I didn't even say hola, like nothing. That lasted for a couple of days because then I recognized that, frankly, as I became more comfortable and as I started to just kind of speak my own opinions, work on my work, keep this massive goal in mind that I needed to do this wrongful conviction reform, that I began to realize, holy cow, I'm actually more powerful being myself than I am trying to fake being somebody else. And not only that, but when I do that, these people respect me because I challenge them, right? And I correct them, and I'm just myself, right? And that's when I realized that I was like, okay, I got this. I don't have to play your game. And then that's literally how I ended up, kind of living and acting in my entire political career. It was always like, I am going to be all the identities because that's what this country is about. I can be a Latina, I can be a woman, I can be a first gen college student, I can be all of these multitudes of identities, because that's literally what we're representing in our community. And so what better way to present yourself to your community as all of those identities that people can see themselves reflected in some way, as you're talking about your background and your challenges and why you're running and what inspires you and what issues you care about, et cetera. So, I just think yes, it is harder. I'm not going to lie, presenting as your authentic self, especially as a woman, especially as a Latina, isn't always well received. And yes, sometimes you're going to get negative feedback. And you know what? Yes, you might actually get some negative polling. People might not want to vote for you. But let me tell you, we have to push back beyond that. Because, as I said at the beginning, some of us are going to be successful. And I was successful on my very first time out. I was successful on my second time out when the Democratic establishment primaried me, because I had the audacity to ask reasonable questions of what was happening, right? And then I ended up losing my additional 2 races after that, right? So I'm like, okay, 2 and 2, I'm good with that. But ultimately, it was never about losing your North Star and who you are, because after all of that, I can tell you 100% that I would go back and do everything the same, all of it. And again, there's so much power in recognizing that some of us are going to win, some of us are going to lose, but we're all going to have this massive impact that's going to benefit the rest of us.
Yes. I hope those who are here tuning in take these lessons and not just hold them to yourself, but share them, because when we see ourselves reflected in so many different spaces and places, then we recognize that Latinos are really showing up in ways that make people sometimes feel uncomfortable. One of the things that I always say, don't invite me to the table and set terms and conditions, right? Um, don't invite me to the table and expect me to just be in the kitchen, right? And I always say, look, be who you are, show up as you are, never water yourself down, because if they don't like what they see, let them choke. And they expect Latinas, right? We talk about being feisty. We're like the taco, right? Like they want to like give us all of these names, and then they expect us to show up in those spaces. And then when they're thinking about political strategy in terms of how they target the Latino community, it's based on a white dominant culture lens. But when we see people like Lucy, when we see other Latinas in other spaces and they're challenging that norm, it causes a ripple effect in terms of how political strategists think about engaging the Latino vote. Um, this is one of the reasons why having this summit, because I believe for us it's we have to be the ones who are also behind the scenes running campaigns, and not just running for office, but really working with political strategists who understand us, and can bring that voice in, which is why I'm here excited to also introduce our other panelist that has joined us, Mayra Lopez-Zuniga, who is a seasoned organizer and a political strategist based in Chicago. She is responsible for successfully electing the first Latina Congresswoman in the Midwest, and a bench of young progressives, Latino candidates, to state and county government positions in Illinois. And so when we talk about having our own people behind the scenes running campaigns, the whole situation changes in the conversation. So Mayra, you're welcome, and kind of walk us through coming into this conversation, and from your perspective as a political strategist on the other side, kind of help us set the stage in terms of the political landscape right now as you see it. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invite, and it's such a pleasure to be here with all these other amazing women who are also doing work to further like how Latinos show up in the spaces of power throughout our communities. I think what you mentioned in terms of we need to be able to be at all of the tables, right? It's not just about putting candidates forward that have our values and the best interests of our community, but it's also about making sure that the infrastructure that is there to push those candidates also has that perspective of the community as well. So we need to be able to invest in both the candidate training and development, and maybe sometimes tapping in the shoulder people that wouldn't see themselves running for office, right, and getting them to be the ones that are stepping up and taking on that huge sacrifice. But we'd also have to do a significant amount of development of our people to be able to run campaigns as well, right? I have had a lot of experiences of folks that are people of color, but majority Latinas that are running for office for the first time. And when they're putting their teams together, they're confronted with the fact that there's just not that many of us with that perspective that's really going to speak to their voice and understand them, and be able to connect with voters with the electorate in a very different way. And they have to be working with, status quo like firms and political strategists in very white dominated spaces that really sometimes hinder people's abilities to speak their truth, right? They want to be able to tone down sometimes like how people want to show up, what parts of their identities they want to show up with. And I think it's so important to be able to have people in the background that are like, no, I come from a similar perspective. And why we do the work is because we have to be able to push those narratives. And so this is how we're going to talk to our people, right? And that pushes her against the status quo. I had the pleasure of running Delia Ramirez's campaign who is now the nominee, the Democratic nominee in the 3rd Congressional District. It's a new district in Illinois, but we're going up in the general, and hopefully she'll be the congresswoman, right? And it was really hard to put a team together that had seasoned Latino operatives, and that had that community value, and like that the perspective of what are the assets in our community and how we're going to talk to our electorate. That was very different. One of the things that I was flabbergasted to find is like so many times like we're so dependent when it comes to strategy and politics to the polling, right? But then the polling itself is flawed because it doesn't really speak to our community so many times, right? Because who are the pollsters? And so yes, if you're finding that Spanish-speaking X, community or this kind of electorate doesn't resonate with X message, yes, it's perhaps maybe because you're not investing enough in talking to our people in our language, and both in the semantics, right, and the just cultural nuances of how we talk to our people, but then also like in our actual language, right? Like there is a lack and a big gap. So these are all sort of the reasons why I think it's just so important to be able to have both in our campaigns in order to further our agenda.
Thank you. Before I move on to the next question, I'm just curious if any of our other panelists want to chime in really quick in regards to this particular topic, or are we good to go on to the next question? Okay. I'm curious then. I'm going to go to our resident doctor. I'm just curious, as in your role, what would you say are some of the cultural value influences that and beliefs that impact the Latina political participation?
Okay. Great. Hello again. And I think some of what everybody has been saying is definitely what we're seeing in some of the research. And with our keynote speaker, Monica also brought up the idea of the confidence gap. So I think that's something, and Lucy's also brought up too, how it's hard when we're challenging the traditional norms of what we see in politics. So in terms of our representation, if we don't see as many Latinas, we may not think it's the best place for us, or we don't think that we fit that traditional mold. And so with women, especially women of color, we have this political confidence gap where we don't think we fit that mold. But I think an important thing to do, which we're doing today, is hopefully talking about how there can be a different mold. And that can bring a unique set of experiences and qualifications and strengths when we run as our authentic self, as Lucy said. And I think another thing with Latinas that we see in the research is we're less likely to be socialized to have interest in politics, where we may not feel like that's our role. But if we stand back and think about how we grew up as Latinos, and it's been mentioned before, we are generally the ones that are told, you need to help out the family, possibly serve as a translator, possibly help your family manage the funds, or even think about what it's like to be in the U.S. or involved even in your school districts, and help out, be a mediator with what's going on at the schools. And the fact that we're doing that as Latinas brings strengths to the table. So we have definitely more experience being a key connection with the Latino community, being key organizers. And what we need to see is how that can actually fuel our motivation to get involved in politics, because we have to do it to help our family and our communities. And by doing that, we are gaining some strengths that could be seen as great potential strengths to have as a candidate if we decide to run for office. The hard part is just having that conversation and having those people that call on us and recruit us to let those Latinas know, you've already been doing the work. You can bring a lot to the table. The hard part is You just don't realize that because you don't see that modeled with who else is being involved in politics. And so something that I think we're all sort of saying the same message is that we're likely going to have that confidence gap. We're likely going to underestimate our qualifications and our place in politics. But if we can realize how we grew up in our Latino culture and our beliefs, that could actually bring us strengths and bring us that motivation and that passion to get involved in politics. And we can think about what we're bringing to the table.
Thank you for that. Johanny, I'm going to go to you next. But I'm going to set the stage really quick before we do. And I hope everyone is like, who is tuning in, is taking notes and ready to sign up to run for office or run a campaign. But Johanny, I really want you to, I'm going to set the stage really quick. You know, my mom came to this country and there was a period of time where she was undocumented. And, you know, she never made it beyond third grade. But I will say this about my mom, right? Is when she came to this country, she was the facilitator. She was that person that when other people came to this country, she set everybody up. She was like, here's the office for this. This is where you sign up your kid for school. And my mom had a very low literacy rate. So she struggled with literacy, but the woman was able to make things happen, right? And even at that capacity, we tend to sometimes overlook people based on those deficits, right? And so when we talk about electability and we talk about the current structure and who it is, when we think about Latinas representing, is that we all have our own journeys here. And so can you just talk to us a little bit about kind of the changing landscape in terms of what electability looks like? And how you, as in your role in the work that you do, the Victory Fund, really are working towards pushing those boundaries and really helping people to recognize that Latinos are here, but we come in so many different experiences. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you're cultivating the next generation?
Sure, and that was a great setup because I really think that sometimes we create those boundaries for ourselves and our community. And I think part of the work that we do in general as Latinas is like we have to work twice as hard. Not only we have to run for office and look electable and be viable, but we also at the same time have to fight back and deconstruct, you know, the machismo mentality. Politics continue to be a male-dominated space across the board, especially, you know, in our community. So sometimes you might feel like you need permission to have a voice, right? And like that you need to, you know, say something and always sound right and make sure that you are coming across or presenting in a certain way, right? And I think it's breaking that stereotype and to Luz's point about running as who you are. And once you get elected, you know, being in office, be who you are, be comfortable in your own skin. And I think claiming our space is the next phase of Latina politics. It is beyond, you know, am I electable? How do I come across? It is claiming our space. We need to have a voice, and I am that Latina voice. So I think it is intimidating. It is intimidating for me as a Latina staffer, you know, as someone who's behind the scene, who's doing the work, just like Mayra. Sometimes, you know, consultants can be, you know, intimidating, especially, you know, in the white space when they're telling you, you know about this because you're part of the community, not because you're actually an expert. They see you and they think you just like speaking as a Latina yourself. You think of yourself as a constituent, and it's like, yes, and I'm an expert at engaging and mobilizing Latino voters. So it's really intimidating, like I said, and deconstructing the machismo within our community. And once you're doing that work at the same time, fighting the other fight while like, you know, supporting and providing the best counsel and the best support to your candidates. I think that's really important to name, right? I think also is fighting back on, you know, we're seeing a lot of disinformation and misinformation in our community, but I think that stems from like the mistrust that we have inherent in the political system. It is beyond us, beyond this generation. It is something that we get from our parents. You know, our parents, we come from places where like, you know, corruption, sham elections, political turmoil, like there's a lot to unpack there about the political system that can hinder our inclination to run for office or even participate in vote. Sometimes we feel like our vote doesn't matter because, you know, it doesn't matter back home. That's what my mom said. That's what my dad said. That's what my dad experienced, or my mom, or my tia. So it's really deconstructing a lot of different things at the same time while you're doing the work, that I think it's what we're going to be able to, the next generation, right? Like, we're going to be able to build from that, being able to, talk about Latinas, talk about Latina voters, talk about Latina, elected officials, and talk about Latina staff and Latina, running campaigns. We don't see that a lot. And I think because of the work that we are doing and the people who paved the way for us to be able to have these jobs, right? Like, as an immigrant myself, like, I never thought I would be the communications director as an ESL kid, the communications director of a national Latino org. And it's only happening because the previous generation, I had the Maria Cardonas of the world who did the work here in DC for many, many years. So, like, building upon what we are building right now, what we're creating right now, I think it's what's going to, propel the next generation of Latina leaders. And having these conversations and creating the space and having the hard conversations, I think it's really important that we talk about a lot of the issues. There are, like, issues across the board that are impacting us no matter what as Latinas. But if we start, like, going a layer down, if you're Afro-Latina, if you're Indigenous Latina, like, there's just so many other layers that you have to face that we haven't been able to even start unpacking because of all the other things that are happening at this level, that we haven't been able to go to the next level and, like, keep going down until we actually have conversations and actually start moving the needle for all Latinas across the board,
And I'm on mute. It would not be a Zoom without somebody being on mute when they're supposed to be talking, right? I'm so glad that we are, like, having this moment to really look at the Latino experience in the political space, because oftentimes things are being done to us without us, right? And so when you think about politics, everyone's always talking about getting out the Black vote. White people already vote, right? So then the Latinos sometimes become that deciding factor, but yet we haven't really built that power when it comes to the turnout, right? Or we have been able to make some dents, but in terms of running for office, there is that gap, and I'm encouraged that as the bosses that we are, right, that we continue to create and build that platform. I'm going to ask Lucy. I see myself so in so many ways. I identify with you because being your true authentic self in spaces and places and being unapologetic about that really changes and challenges the stereotype, right? So can you just talk to us a little bit about your own personal journey when you ran? I know for me, I was told to say that I wasn't a single mom. Que en la comunidad Latina, everybody's like, "Oh, you're a single mom and you're running for office. You're gonna neglect, your daughter." And I'm like, "No, I'm gonna show her what it looks like." I struggled with my own people telling me to be careful of how people were going to perceive me. And, that also created a sense of imposter syndrome in many ways for me. So can you talk to me a little bit about kind of what it took for you to really be all of who you are in spaces and places when you were running for office, and bring that into the space?
I experienced all of that from people that would shock you. Other women's groups. I was told not to I wasn't allowed to wear skirts anymore because my legs were too long, even though my skirts were knee level. Apparently my legs were too nice. So it's like, okay. And I didn't wear skirts for a while until I was like, this is dumb, and I started wearing what I wanted to wear, and collected. But I think I want to take it back just a little bit, because the confidence gap and this confidence conversation is really important. It's really important. I did not wake up one night and be like, I'm here. Hey, what's up? Vote for me. I got this, right? Like, that didn't happen overnight. It was a process, but it was really these pivotal moments where I started to frankly believe in myself. And if everyone who is listening to this, anyone who listens to this in the future, if you start with yourself and say, I absolutely can do this, everyone else will then believe it. but you have to believe it first. And I think for me, another pivotal moment that happened in that same legislative building when I was not elected, when folks started saying, people would tell me, you know, Lucy, you should maybe consider running. And I'd be like, what? That's not, no. Right. And because of course, at that time, I didn't think something like that was possible, to the point that Johanny made, right? That, or someone made about us, that's not, we don't grow up political, right? We don't grow up thinking that we're going to be elegidas and diputadas and, you know, all the things, right? And I remember when I started testifying as a legislative extern on these wrongful conviction proposals, I would listen to the questions these people were asking, and I would look across the dice, and I would see all the people, and I would tell myself, holy shit, these people are dumb. I would literally be like, how did they get elected? What? And, you know, and there I am, a young law student, like, you know, breaking it down. Here's the legal standard. Here's this, here's that. Because, you know, as Latinas, we're always overprepared, right? Because of that confidence gap, which is not a bad thing. But I started to realize, oh my gosh, if you could do this, I 100% can do this. And that's where it started, right? It started not necessarily by seeing other Latinas who had done it, because there had been no other Latina who'd done it at the time, but it started by looking at this landscape and recognizing that not only was I just as capable, but in many instances, I was more capable. And then I started to internalize that, and I started to get good at my testimony and practice and all this stuff. And over the years, I just, you know, you start to build that confidence, and then you start to say, okay, yeah, I can do this. I can definitely do this. And I think that was where my journey then went. So then when I was faced with, I was told to cut my hair. In fact, there was a Vice article just on me refusing to cut my hair. Because that was like such a thing. I was developing this reputation, you know, of being like hard to work with. Because, you know, like if a Latina says, no, I don't want to cut my hair to look like this white lady, that's hard to work with, right? Consultants, like, you know, I started to develop this reputation that they were going to have a hard time with me because I had an opinion, you know, and all the things. And I didn't care, because guess what happened? I ended up attracting a team, mostly white, because there wasn't too many Latino consultants for me to choose from at the time, but who were aligned with me and who wanted to support me. I had one Latino consultant, James Aldretti, really amazing mentor friend of mine based in Austin. But outside, and he was always my champion, you know, and he understood me. But I really had to, when I started to stand for who I was, how I wanted to run my campaign, how I wanted to present, because I knew that worked. Because to somebody else's point, we are experts in our community. We are experts in knowing what lands, what messaging does not, what issues are important, what issues are not. I don't give a shit about your polling. Your polling doesn't mean anything in my community. Let me tell you about the polling, right? We know what's working and what's not, and how we should be talking about it. And when you, and of course, like the pollsters don't like that, you know, because they're like, no, we're data. So it is a lot of pushing, and it is, and like I said, still to this day, it is going to be hard because there's not enough of us. It breaks my heart every single day when I see these Latina elected numbers. My God, they have not changed proportionately in much of it anyway at all. There's been a tiny little bit of increase since 10 years ago when I was first elected. And that is heartbreaking, not just because we're not there, because that's a loss for our communities. It's a loss for this country. And they are not given the privilege of having our leadership and our talent out there. So like we just have to keep pushing and pushing. And yes, it's going to be hard. And now, like with Mayra's point, there are more Latino consultants. I saw a question in there. And trust me, not every Latino consultant is going to be good, you know, and not every Latino candidate is going to be good. Like, let's get beyond that as well. You know, there's always going to be bad and good in all kinds of spaces. But when you start to recognize that these are your boundaries, and this is what you're willing to do, and this is how you're going to run, because you know that that's the way you're going to run, then you'll begin to attract those people that want to support you in that way.
Yes, and then that's when you win, right? Because the only way we're gonna win is if we run, right? So we need to
Right.
make sure that people recognize that power. And here's one thing I was saying. Then my next question is going to be to Mayra, so just prepárate because I'm going to you next. Um, when I ran in 2019, you know, my strategy was, especially because I was dead broke, right? I was not the candidate of choice, and so my funds reflected that. So, but I was good with it. I was at bodegas, barbershops, hair salons. I was at the laundromat. Girl, I was, crashing barbecues and baby showers, rolling up on people in supermarkets. And whether you voted or not, I was like, look, I don't care. If you don't even remember my name, put your own name on the ballot. That's how people are going to start representing our neighborhoods, because they see that our people are voting, right? So the message really was for people to recognize that power of getting out to vote and how important it is. And, I talk about only winning by one vote. That is crazy, right? To win by one vote. But it really showed the power of the people, right? And when people saw me in those spaces, and that ability of being vulnerable and being who I am, it was really about an invitation to be yourself as well, right? And that a vulnerability, and knowing that I didn't know it all. And I think that when you are able to show up in that way, you create space for other people to recognize that they too can do it. And I think, Lucy, you being as fierce as you are and not watering yourself down really set the stage for other women to recognize that they can run as they are. And I think that that is the most important piece of this conversation, is recognizing that we don't have to leave ourselves at the door for anyone. Mayra, I'm going to ask you this because I know we've been talking a lot about this whole national trend and how the different folks are, they believe that they have a formula of how they're going to target Latino voters and how they're going to influence them and what the messaging is going to look like. Can you talk to us a little bit about that trend that is happening across the country, and how our family values and our cultural values is informing some of that political dynamic that's happening right now?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because right now I think that I feel like people thought that they knew how to target Latinos. And then the national trends have shown that people don't really know, right? That there's this huge question about whether Latinos are gravitating to the right, and they're leaving the Democratic Party, and this entire narrative around like they were supposed to be with us, but they're not, and they're voting against their self-interest. My personal opinion is I don't think that the Democratic Party has done a really good job of investing in talking to the Latino electorate and understanding it and realizing that there are nuances, right? That we're not monolithic, and that there are so many different layers to the complexities of like what Latinos think and how they act and how they show up. And so I think right now, like people are, it's an interesting time where people are looking to, well, what does it take to move Latinos, right, and to do it in mass numbers? For me, bottom line, it's like lack of investment, right, has not allowed us to really penetrate. Like I mentioned, there are all these places where there's a growing Latino populations, but because of the fact that there are a lot of undocumented people, we're mixed status families, right? A lot of undocumented people, a lot of LPRs, or legal permanent residents who haven't then become citizens, and then like citizens who haven't registered, and the people that are registered to just have an apathy because we haven't delivered for them, right? Like the immigrants haven't delivered for them sometimes. So I think there's so many different layers, and we haven't invested enough in being able to then both in the comms pieces, in the media, like how to get the right kind of messaging with the right kind of nuances, speaking to people's language, and then also in the human capital. I always say there's tons of talent out there, right? Especially within Latinos, especially Latinas, there's tons of talent, but we don't invest enough in being able to then nurture people that have significant skills that can be transferable to the political space. I've sat in rooms with people that are, thinking of running for office certainly, but very big roles like presidential, that say, "Oh, I just couldn't find a person." Sometimes it's like a person of color with this kind of caliber to run X, Y, and Z, or to be like a comms person, and my face just drops every time. It's like, there's tons of people out there, but we haven't created our opportunities, or we always go after cookie cutter resumes, right? And then also, let's be honest, there's like an infrastructure problem in terms of the political back end, right? Like, who can actually afford to take low salaries, work very extreme, long days, like periods, and then go without sometimes benefits, right? Because only until recently campaigns have been offering benefits for employers. Leave all of that and do it temporarily, and then do it again and do it again. It's not sustainable, and especially not sustainable for working class people. And so, like, if we want to be able to increase the numbers of people that are doing this work, like, the actual infrastructure of how campaigns run needs to also change. So I just think that, I think maybe I diverted from your question, but in terms of, how do we message to Latinos? I think we're still trying to like figure it out. And I think, to everybody's point, that's why it is important that folks, one, we're able to create space for folks to be involved, right? Through changing like who's running the campaigns, the kind of candidate, right, that is running, that is authentic, that makes people feel like they have something in common. And if they can do it, then I can do it, right? And then also that we actually change the way that campaigns are being run in the back end, where it's not just like metrics and talking to people, like phone bankings or whatever. That's all important too, but we also have to be able to meet people where they're at. And I think that oftentimes, like, we just don't have enough time to do that. So for me, that's why it's also really important that most of the people that I've had the pleasure of working with are people that are very much not necessarily political folks, but community people who just been around for a long time and have been able to build a lot of relationships that can then pool a different kind of electorate, that we can actually expand the electorate, how people say it, through like all these relationships that are happening at the base building community level. And I think that is, something that we don't invest enough in, and especially when people have this idea that it's really going to be all about resources and all about money, because sometimes people really see political empowerment and campaigns as a business rather than we're doing it for our community.
Thank you. So I am excited to announce that I'm going to bring some of the questions that we're getting into the chat into the space, because it can't just be about me asking questions. This is about creating space for everybody to step into that power. So I'm going to pick a question that I think is relevant to the conversation that we're having right now. And it's from Evelyn Barahona, who is from Boston representing. I'll pick some people from other spaces so you don't think I'm being biased. But her question is, how do you get through Latinos that are consuming misinformation and voting against their own interests? And I think that this is definitely a conversation that is important for us to have as we continue to think about how we build power. So I'm not sure who wants to answer that question. You can raise your hand, or could you start? Lucy, dale.
I'll take it. We've done a lot of work on mis and disinformation in the media space. So, without going into a whole thing about mis and disinformation and how it works, et cetera, it is incredibly pervasive and it is very dangerous, as you guys can see. And it does not help when there are very little limitations and regulation in the way in which that information travels on social media, et cetera. So we are up, again, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? That's a part of this panel. We are up against a very, very formidable problem. And it is our immigrant, but not just limited to immigrant. It can literally be, I think every single one of us probably has a conspiracy theorist in our family, right? Or in our friend circle. Like, we're not, everyone psychologically has a disposition to be able to fall for mis and disinformation. Disinformation is when bad actors are putting the bad information out there on purpose. Misinformation is when someone falls for it and accidentally shares it. And some people intentionally will share disinformation knowing that it's wrong. So, the thing is that there are now a bunch of different types of organizations and projects and initiatives, especially within the Latino community, that is looking to battle, to push back against a lot of this disinformation. The very first thing, though, that I would tell everyone, and this is kind of like the rule, there's been some research, some psychological, sociological research now on the efficacy of how we deal with misinformation. And the number one thing that they always recommend is that we don't repeat the lie, that we don't repeat the thing, right? And we tend to do that as people. Like, we'll be knocking on a door and someone will say, oh, well, so-and-so is taking our guns. And as opposed to repeating that and saying so-and-so does not want to take your gun, you literally just don't even say that, and instead move past that and say, the law actually says this, and don't even, don't engage in that topic, because the more that we repeat it and try to do the myth busting, the more that we actually end up reinforcing the myth. That's just the way that it works. And so that's the number one thing when messaging against that. And then second, I think that we also, as Latinos, we sometimes don't want to cause waves. We don't, even within our own communities, our friends, et cetera, we tend to just be like, oh, well, we don't want to argue about that, or we're just going to step away from this conversation. But we do have to engage in this conversation with as many people as possible, in this, strategic way. And there's tons of resources out there, like there's so much research now and so many resources and really great tips on how to deal with it. Go educate yourself. Go spend an hour just reading through what are the different strategies that you should employ, especially as a consultant or as a volunteer, or if you're running for office. And that way you can essentially train yourself, right, on how to best approach these subjects with people. But the answer is not to ignore it. Right. That's definitely not the answer. And so I would say, my recommendation is, one, start there. And because there are effective strategies against it. And then two, do a quick Google search, do a search on the various initiatives that are out there, because like I said, there's plenty. Florida Rising out in Florida is doing a huge misinformation, disinformation project that extends beyond Florida and kind of into the East Coast. There's a number of different, as I said, there's initiatives out there, and there's money that's being now finally allocated towards trying to deal with this specifically in the Latino community. And very specifically also in the Spanish-dominant, Spanish-speaking community, which is actually the community that's the most vulnerable to mis and disinformation. So that's kind of like, my suggestions in terms of, but at the end of the day, we do have to be very intentional about this. You know what I mean? Like, we can't just pretend this isn't happening and be like, oh, so-and-so is just crazy, or whatever. Oh, don't bother, don't mind them. Or, no, we have, this is hurting our people. It is very, very harmful, so harmful to our families, to our people. And so we have to take this with the seriousness that it deserves, because this is rising to the level of being a public health issue for us, right? And we have to treat it with that seriousness.
Thank you for that. In the time of Google, I always find myself now with my mom, who's 73, and whenever she wants to debate with something that she heard that I'm like, I don't know if that's true, I'm like, okay, but let's Google it, and then let's do number of layers of links, and then do fact checking, because even on Google you get lost and there's a lot of misinformation there. And so I think the internet is a great resource, but it's also detrimental. So vamos Google it to see if it's true. Sometimes it's not true. So you wanted to, yeah, go ahead, Lucy.
I do want to clarify one more point. This concept of voting against your own interest, that's also not effective. When we tell people, you voted for this thing and they took away their health care, right? That doesn't connect with people who already believe and have justified in their own way that this person is the right vote for them because this person connected with them in some other way. I always tell people to remember, voting is one of the most illogical things that we can do as a human. It is. People do not vote on facts. People vote on feelings, and people vote on how they feel about people and yes, the facts matter and all of these things matter, but oftentimes people are voting emotionally when they go in there. And so then when you tell them, why would you vote against your own interest? You're hurting yourself, you're doing this, you're doing that. That immediately cuts people off. They shut off, they turn into their defense mode and their defense mechanism, and they will stop hearing everything that you're saying. So that's actually one of the things that I want to say too. We have to take this whole people are voting in against their own interest out of our lexicon. They believe that they are voting in their own interest. And that's the level that we need to start communicating and empathizing with them on, as opposed to judging them, because we logically know that they are voting against their own interest, but we have to begin to instead recognize, why do they believe that this is the right vote for them? And then we can start to actually creep in on some of the issues that are kind of, making them think that.
I want to echo that, Julia, before we go to the next question, because Latinos are persuasion voters. You need to give them a reason to vote. When you go knock on a door, it's not about I'm a Democrat versus I'm a Republican. It is about how your life is going to be better off if you elect me. And if you're not able to communicate that with every voter you come across, you have a communication problem across the board. And media is great as it relates to like getting out there, get your name ID, but you need to be relatable. You need to talk to voters like you're talking to your abuelita, like you're talking to a 7-year-old, like you're talking to your son, your nephew, whoever in your family, a family member. You need to give Latinos a reason to vote. And to Luz's point, don't judge them. I think we go with this high ground, like you're voting against your interests, Republicans are terrible. It's about how you're going to make my life better. And that's your message. Meeting people where they are, whether that is the economy, whether it's about education, healthcare. It's how my life is going to be better off by voting for you or by voting for Democrats. And I think that's we get a little lost in that conversation, especially because you get the polling, you get the consultants, especially the non-Latino consultants who tell you this is what the data is saying. And I'm all about polling. As a communications person, you should, of course, always listen to the research and always listen to the poll. But there's a lot of your instinct that goes into this work in politics, in understanding your community and understanding your audience. So that way you can speak about what really is important to that particular community, to that particular voter. But yes, know your audience, know your voter, and give them a reason to vote for you.
That's right. That's right. I always say this to people. Any interaction you have with folks, you always want to ask yourself, what do you want them to think, feel, and do? And that feeling piece, right? That energy, because nosotros tenemos esa dulzura. Nosotros tenemos, we have this ability to really create space because we've come to this country and have had to make space for ourselves, right? So there's a gift that of being of that immigrant experience and having families who have come here, that we know how to navigate, right? So it's just about being able to connect with that sense of self. And so when you show up at a door, is to really be with that person, and to listen, not to influence, right? But to really listen and to be in community with people, because that cultural gift that we have of really being about our family values, those things resonate we're on the campaign trail, right? So really tap into that. I'm going to bring in some more folks, okay? So we got people on the Facebook Live wanting to get in the conversation. We got people in the chat, and we're here for all of it. So I'm going to ask a question that came from Facebook, and I'm going to ask Christina to take this one. So get yourself ready for it. They asked, is there a place where we can see the amount of Latinos that are eligible to vote in our communities, and how participation has historically, in terms of turnout, been throughout the country and or the state? Like, can you just talk to us kind of in terms of the research? What are some of the trends in terms of Latino engagement and activation?
Okay, great. In terms of the research that's out there, we have a couple of Latino civil rights organizations like NALEO, National Association of Latino Elected Officials, that usually do reports. Unidos does reports as well, where they provide not just the statistics about the Latino potential voters, eligible voters, how they turned out to vote, but then also some polling information that is culturally competent polling information that actually goes and talks to the Latinos themselves and gets an idea about the issues that were important to them, and then also the candidates and the parties that they support. So definitely, if you go to those Latino organizations, they can provide some of those fact sheets. And then if you really want to delve into it, there's also research by political scientists that try to share some of this with those Latino organizations. Like, I have 2 books, The Latina Advantage, where I talk about some of these candidate advantages that we bring to the table, and then also The Latino Gender Gap, where I looked at some of the gender differences and how Latinos feel about the big issues and how they vote. And I also want to add one more note based on the last question and tying into this question, is that some of the issues that we also see about what Latinos really care about, what would motivate them to go out and vote, and who they choose to vote for. We also have to realize they care about a multitude of issues, and we can't have this stereotypic view that they, for example, only care about immigration. Yes, they may care about immigration, but they care about a lot of other issues. And the National Survey of Latinos, where they put out information, I think the latest one was in the end of August. They said the 5 most important issues for Latinos: inflation, crime and gun violence, jobs and the economy, healthcare, and then abortion has increased in the matter of importance. Immigration wasn't the top 5. So if we have some candidates, especially some white candidates, that are saying, oh, I'm going to get the Latino vote if I just talk about immigration, they have to realize they have to go a lot further, and they have to be able to connect with Latino voters and the potential that they have to sway elections.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm going to bring in, and I have to give a shout out to all the folks who are on the West Coast right now. I have Sasha from California, okay, coming in. I don't know what time it is over in your part of the country, but I'm happy that you are here, and you're not only here, but you're actively participating. So I'm bringing in Sasha's question. She would like to know, and let me put on my glasses, because if I'm on speaker view, y'all are like, who is this chipmunk? My question is how can we get involved in advocacy work by making it a career, not just during campaign season? Mayra, I'm going to ask you to take that, because you have managed to do that successfully. It's turned this really into a career, and that's why we're so incredibly happy to have you here with us today. Talk to us. What can Sasha do? And those who are also listening in.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very important question. And I think it goes back to my point about the infrastructure, right, of how like campaigns are put together and how it's temporary and it's like cycle after cycle. I think, now I think more than before, there are more organizations that are strictly like more political entities, right? There's a lot more C4s to the C3 side. I think like looking at wherever you're at in California, Who are the people that are doing the work around voter engagement, right? That's like one good way to start to do some of that research. Who's doing the voter engagement in your community? And then what are the political tables around like that kind of work where there can be possibilities and opportunities for, long-term employment. But I do think there is a huge gap. Like there's just like not enough of these kinds of entities, and there's not enough organizations that allow people to then, go, especially in my experience coming from, I started as a community organizer. Like that was like my very beginnings, and through my C3 work, I realized like there was a gap and I needed to do more on the electoral side. And so I think we need to be able to create also more ecosystems within the Latino community where there are C3, C4 opportunities and people are able to gravitate from one to the other so that we can start to have a bigger pool of who are the people that are doing the political work in our communities from our communities that then can then seek other opportunities when something comes up. One of our folks that wants to run for office, there's an open seat, there's a vacancy, like all these other things. And, people can be more ready because there's an ecosystem around who's at the table, like whether through an organizational lens, in a nonprofit way, or in an electoral way.
And I just want to add, there is a resource called Idealist. It is basically like it's a jobs list. It's like a monster.com or whatever, but it is entirely focused on impact jobs and social change jobs. So they have a ton of campaigns that also not advertise, but recruit on that list as well. At some point, there was a database for Latino political workers. Johanny, I don't know if you know, it was. I don't think it was connected. I don't think it was through LP, and it probably just doesn't exist anymore. there was like a.
There are multiple email lists. If you're interested, feel free to send an email. But one of them is I need to find it. I promise I will share with you all. What it's sent out with what we send out to the audience after the fact. But like, yeah, there are multiple job listing, and on that, I think one space that to Mayra's point about gravitating from C3 to C4, there are major organizations who do that job. Like, for example, I come from Planned Parenthood. It is easy to do it there because they have the infrastructure. And I think we need more of that. We need, like, at Latino Victory, we actually have a C4, more like C4 political work. But I think we need more of that in the Latino space, dedicated to doing C3, telling voters to, go out to vote, and then giving them reasons, give them like the resources to support, specific candidates or specific issues on ballot initiatives. That's another conversation that we should have. Like, how do we get Latinos to vote on ballot initiatives? Because those are the things that are impacting the day-to-day, like our day-to-day lives. And we need to make sure that voters know what they're voting for. And the impact on that in our communities. So yes, I will be sure to share that and so you all know like where to go and sign up and get the job listings and the information.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask.
I also
go
just wanted to add, like for people that are looking to get more involved into electoral spaces, like somebody that I've seen do this very well, where they're able to transition people into opportunities, but it is campaign stuff for the most part, is the Arena. They put on a whole training with different tracks on how, one that might not have a lot of experience going into the political arena, or people that might have some experience as a volunteer, but then want to actually get trained to be a comms person, to be a field person, to be a campaign manager. And so the Arena puts on these, sometimes they're like week-long trainings, sometimes in person. They've done some online, but then the cool thing that I think that they do is that they then keep people on their big email list where they're consistently sending out job opportunities for campaigns, and also for just like C4 work, where it's more like registering people to vote or targeting a specific like demographic. And so they have a network of people that are involved and then also sending opportunities. So there's always like an arena connection. I think people should check it out.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask one more question from the audience, but before I transition to that, all of this conversation in terms of like how we show up and who gives us opportunities to show up, right? Because sometimes there's a lot of gatekeepers who decide whether or not we're going to hire a certain individual based on just whatever the resume looks like or whatever preconceived assumptions you have of folks. But I want for those who are tuning in to recognize that we've been fighting our entire lives, right? And every space that we've shown up since we were young has been political. And we may not know it as such. And I'll tell you this is that I remember being 9 years old and I was at the welfare office translating for my mom who did not speak English. And I remember the case manager was really mean. And I didn't want my mom to know what they were saying because I only translated for my mom what she needed to know. And I absorbed the rest of that because it made me feel bad. But this is the thing. Is that when it was time for me to translate on behalf of my mom, I told her about herself. I said, my mom said you were not being nice. And even at the age of 9, I knew then that I was claiming my power, right? And as we continue to navigate the world, I'm sure many of us have been in so many spaces where we've had to be the only one to speak up, whether it was on behalf of Latinos or on behalf of others, right? And in that moment of discomfort, right, that is when you really recognize that power. And then when you speak, and even when you know that saying, even if your voice quivers, you have said it. And that is reaffirming. And I think that when we, as Latinos, there's this notion that we are invisible. Because when we think about race and politics here in this country, it usually divides between Black and white, right? There's this whole network of culture that is disconnected from that conversation. And I think that what this moment is really calling for is for Latinos to really show up, right? And be in spaces unapologetically. And the question that is coming up here is around, and we're going to dive into this particular issue in our later panel, but I really wanted to bring it into this space because it is something for us to unpack. And I would love Lucy or Johanny, because you both have worked in this electability conversation in so many ways. But this one is, my glasses back on. This one is from Maria, who is a naturalized Latina citizen who is very pale. So basically she's a light-skinned Latina, y'all. So she might be really light that people think that she is white passing, if you will. And so when she speaks, you could tell that, you know, her language is Spanish and she's fluent. And the question is how do you represent the Latinos when they don't consider you one of them? Because she does not feel like she's brown enough. So I'm just curious from Johanny or Lucy or anyone here, kind of when we think about culture and we think about Latinos and how we're seen or perceived, how do we grapple with that?
I can definitely speak to this really quick, and Johanny, please feel free to add. But at loosemedia.co, if you go to our website, this is one of the reasons why I launched Loose Media, is because we didn't have enough conversations, enough thought leadership, enough anything published conversations about identity and culture and what that means. And Latinos barely understand ourselves, much less. And then we have all these white people trying to understand us, right? After they've written the narratives for us. And so we actually have a couple of articles talking specifically about this and specifically about white passing Latinas. And I'll be perfectly honest, we have work to do within our own community. We got some negative feedback when we talked about white passing Latinas and what their challenges are because of the internalized racism that exists in our community. And our, you know, and also just like our sense of, when you've been oppressed and you've been considered the minority your whole life, and I mean, I get it, right? There's a lot of pain and there's a lot of trauma in our community. But there was a lot of like, why are we giving white Latinas any space? They already have the privilege that they don't their experience isn't anywhere near an Afro-Latina, etc. That was never, of course, the conversation, right? And no one was making that argument, but we were putting it out there that white Latinas have their own set of challenges and they still have privilege that many other Latinas don't. So I think that this is such a personal question. Everyone struggles with their Latinidad, including Indigenous Latinos, Afro and Black Latinos. I struggle because of the boxes. I'm like, I'm not white, but I'm also not Black, but I'm also not Indigenous. Like, where's my box? And so it's like such a personal thing that I think going back to the conversations that we had earlier, you have to start with yourself first, and you have to feel confident about who you are first. And that, again, that doesn't happen overnight, but the more that you begin to intentionally have those conversations with yourself, and obviously if you have an accent, or if there's anything that does present yourself as a Latina, but then you're white, and then you get that confused look from all the white people, that in and of itself is a challenge. And so a lot of this is really sitting with yourself and asking yourself, how do I want to talk about my identity? And use that as a plus, not as a negative. Use it as a part of your story where you're then able to say, oh yeah, did you know that there's such a thing as white passing Latinas or white Latinas? Because there's also debate about whether or not it's white or white passing. So again, who doesn't matter. What's accurate is what's for you. And to be able to say, I'm proud of my immigrant roots. I am also proud to be X, X, Y, and Z, a new resident of the United States, whatever. And, and being able to celebrate these cultures in these ways, and being able to educate people about how we're all so different, and blah, blah, blah. And really like turn that into part of your story, as opposed to looking at it as a negative. When we can use these parts of our experiences, own them, and be very authentic and transparent about the fact that it's not easy even for you, but that you want to use that in a way to help and further the conversation, the community, etc. People identify with that. Because people then are like, whoa, I struggle with that too, or whoa, that's super interesting, or whatever. Like, to Johanny's point earlier, like when you give people a reason to vote for you, listen to you, engage with you, they will do it, right? As opposed to presenting all of these things either as a problem or a challenge or whatever. But yeah, that's at least what we've seen is the way in which we can engage on these conversations and make them useful, as opposed to it being a negative for us.
Yes. So I love that. And one of the things that I've been hearing a lot, and I'm so happy that it's getting trendy right now, is really leading with asset based. Because when we think about our people, everybody wants to talk about all the things that we don't have, and that's why you should invest. But I'm like, nah. There are a lot of things that we have, and if we can uplift those assets, and then the funding community and folks in politics could really start thinking about these things as assets and not deficits. I think that that's also part of that conversation. And I think you framed that so beautifully, and I'm so glad that you did. I cannot believe it. We only got 5 more minutes left, y'all. And there's 4 of us up in here. We all talk a lot. I'm going to, I would love for each of you, if you can, as we close out this panel, the next panel that we're going to be diving into is galvanizing and building alliances around diverse communities. But we So you guys are really doing a great job in setting us up for the next conversation. But I would love if you each, as you start thinking about the conversation that we had today, and some words of encouragement or wisdom that you want to bestow on the over 500 people that we have up in here. I don't know if you know that. We're close to 600 people who have logged in across the country to be in community with us. So you have an audience, okay? So take advantage of that audience. And I'm going to ask you each to kind of share some reflections or words of encouragement. But this is your opportunity. This is your Oprah moment, okay? So I don't know who wants to go first. Lucy, since you just spoke, I'm gonna have Mayra. You go first.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for the opportunity again. And it was a pleasure to be here with these other amazing women that are doing a lot of work in our country. But I mean, I would just like to leave the audience, like, I think the one thing that I persistently heard today, and I think that I always like remind my candidates and myself, right? It's about this notion of authenticity and showing up as your true self and being comfortable with that. And also the fact that it's, you yourself and how you show up and how you are comfortable with different parts of your identity. It's always going to be changing, right? And so that's another thing too, that it's not like, it's fluid, that it's okay as a woman, and it is okay as a Latina woman and as an immigrant woman to like make mistakes and not get it, right every time, and have this like idea that everything has to be perfect, and we hold so much, and sometimes it just gets in the way of actually being able to do the work and take care of ourselves and have those boundaries. So I think that my takeaway from this, and what I would want to leave people with, is that it is okay to be able to make mistakes, that it is okay to take chances and to like not know, right? And be able to, go out there and do the healing and the learning and the just like experimenting that then allows you to actually find your true voice and your passion, and everything is a journey. So I think that for me, like, that's what I would leave the panel, and specifically as Latina women doing the work. Another thing that I would want people to just like really walk away with is that it is kind of our responsibility, if we see that there is a gap, to make sure that we are creating space for the people behind us, right? And for the other people, and to make it easier every step of the way. And if we want things to change, we have to have a mandate to like want to make sure that we're pulling other people, that they can struggle less than what we did to get to where we're at.
Thank you for that. And I know folks are asking for people's, social media handles and emails, and we'll have someone in the chat that will be sharing that information with folks, because people are itching to connect with you all. And I am under a time crunch. I got 2 more minutes. I'm going to ask Johanny to go next. Some words of encouragement or reflection.
I mean, I just want to let the audience know that you have what it takes to run for office. You are complete, you're qualified, you're ready. Just put your name out there. You don't need validation. You don't need people to tell you whether you're good enough or not. You have it in you. Have that confidence. Just like Lucy said earlier, you have to believe in yourself first before other people do it. And I wanted to let you all know that you're ready, that you're qualified, that you're enough, and that we cannot wait to see you leading across the country at every level of government. So please think about it. 2024 is just around the corner. I know we have an election in a month, actually, but 2024, it's around the corner. And we are ready and excited to see Latinas up and down the ballot.
Yes, you heard that. A correr todo el mundo. Okay, so I'm going to go next to Christina.
Hello. Yeah, it was a pleasure to share the virtual stage with all of these strong, wise Latinas. And for everybody that's watching, I would definitely think about finding any way that you can get involved in issues that are important to you. And that goes with volunteering for community organization, getting involved in political campaigns, because we need you behind the scenes as well. And then thinking about how your identity and your personal experiences and your perspective can bring a needed and unique viewpoint. and their strengths that have often been overlooked because they're not those traditional ways that we look at who's in politics. But I would leave you with even thinking about like how my niece talks about her superpowers. Like she thinks she has superpowers, even if it's just a good memory. Thinking about what your superpowers are and what you're bringing to politics. Thank you.
We're all superheroes. Love that. Okay, Lucy.
Okay, I'll make it fast. I think I would just say, don't be afraid to be completely authentic and celebrate your culture and who you are. I say that knowing that at times it's going to feel challenging and at times it's going to feel scary. But the reminder that I will leave you with is that win or lose, you will always have people who are looking at you. And you are always going to have other Latinas and other women and other people who are being inspired, who are finally seeing someone that feels like them, talks like them, etc. It's not always about win or lose. It is about us changing the narrative, changing the culture, changing what a Latina candidate looks like. And every single thing that you do is contributing to that. So when those times do feel scary and when they do feel challenging and people are trying to push back, just remember the impact that is connected to that. And that's going to give you like that inner little push to be like, okay, wait, let me remember my North Star. And you know, to Johanny's point, yes, like so proud of everyone here and what's to come, and let's go do this.
Yes, Latinas represent here all day, every day. So you're gonna move on to your next panel. Thank you to my panelists. You guys are so super dope. I am so super energized, and I'm loving all of this. So hopefully you guys will stay tuned for the next one. If you're available, do so. Pero ya, this wraps up our panel for this conversation today. We'll see you at the next one. Un besotes.